Welcome back to CBC News Network. The U.S. Congress is pushing ahead with new legislation to impose economic sanctions on Russia for reported meddling in last year's election and military aggression. The bill has bipartisan support and is expected to pass quickly when it's introduced on Tuesday. But, and this is a big but, the Trump administration is opposed to it, arguing it could make future diplomacy with the Kremlin much more difficult. So let's turn once again to Dave Leventhal and David Martosco in Washington for their reactions. So Dave, let's start with you. What do you make of this move by Congress to put forward this legislation that includes sanctions on Russia?
The balance of powers in the U.S. government are alive and well, and there are plenty of hawks in Congress on the Republican side who just think that Russia truly is an enemy or definitely an adversary that needs to be held in check. And lots of Democrats are just looking to kind of hit Donald Trump on anything that they possibly can. So sort of a confluence of factors are conspiring to create a rare situation in Washington, which is Democrats and Republicans in Congress actually agreeing on something. So this bill seems full speed ahead. It's something that would appear, at least in its current form, to be veto-proof. They have enough votes both on the House and the Senate side to ostensibly go ahead and override any veto that Donald Trump would put forward, although Donald Trump has not indicated whether he would veto legislation of this sort. And, of course, there would be political peril that may come his way if he does, given the Russian overtones to all of this vis-a-vis the investigation that's currently going on, or should I say multiple investigations. So this is going to be a very difficult decision if this does go forward for Donald Trump as to what he's going to do. And the bill is designed to limit his ability to even beat it back. Congress is really putting the hard oversight screws onto Donald Trump with this so that Congress would basically hold the keys to any loosening of the sanctions that were put forward both on Russia and North Korea, which is part of the package.
And now, Dave just mentioned balance of power, and this bill sort of touches off a power struggle also between the Oval Office and Congress. So what powers does Trump have to veto this bill? I know we heard from Dave that it seems veto-proof right now. And what sort of situation does that put him in? I read in the New York Times they called it remarkably handcuffed. It's an interesting description there. What do you make of it all?
Well, I will tell you with 100% certainty, because I've talked to people in the West Wing in the last 24 hours about this, Donald Trump will not veto this bill. He can't afford to be overridden by Congress, and he can't afford right now to appear like he's doing Russia any special favors. The investigations are heating up. This is one of these things that will come back to hang around his neck. Dave mentioned in the last segment that Trump and Scaramucci are not people who look backward in terms of their past donations and Democratic leanings and all of that. Trump also doesn't look backward on policy. When he loses something, he brushes his hands and says, okay, what's next, guys? And I've been with him when he does this. He gets some bad news. Oh, the travel ban has been held up in the courts, this and that. And he doesn't say, oh, get all upset about it, maybe for a few seconds. But he literally will say, okay, what's next? So if they pass this bill with a veto-proof majority, he's not going to veto it. He's not going to, even if it doesn't pass with a veto-proof majority, he's not going to veto this. He's going to say, okay, what's next, guys? And I think what's most interesting about this bill, by the way, is not the fact that it includes new sanctions. It's the fact that it requires congressional review if a president wants to roll back any sanctions from Russia. So not just for the moment, but in the future, any president, not just Trump, will not be able to ease the pain that Moscow's feeling without Congress buying in. That's going to be an impossibly hard bar to clear. So all of a sudden you have Trump, who is seen as buddying up to Vladimir Putin, having some explaining to do the next time they get together on the margins of a G20.
And, with this new information coming out yesterday, certainly we know that Scaramucci had to address it when he was making his rounds today on Sunday talk show. So, Dave, Scaramucci was asked about the Russia hacking issue on a talk show today. Let's take a quick look at what he had to say.
There's a lot of disinformation out there. Somebody said to me yesterday, I won't tell you who, that if the Russians actually hacked this situation and spilled out those emails, you would have never seen it. You would have never had any evidence of them, meaning that they're super confident in their deception skills and hacking. My point is, all of the information isn't on the table yet.
And, you know, we put this to David before, but Dave, I did want you to touch on this. The Trump administration, as we heard from that clip, doesn't necessarily agree that Russia did meddle in the election. So would the White House then see this as a move by Congress of trying to sort of tie the president's hands in a key matter of foreign policy?
Perhaps, and I guess the one area where Donald Trump is looking backward, and in fact looking backward constantly, is to the 2016 election and what happened or what didn't happen with Russia meddling, and whether his administration or then his campaign was involved in any sort in working with the Russians, dealing with the Russians, conspiring or colluding with the Russians, as some Democrats would suggest. So as a result of that, he's kind of got bigger fish to fry with Russia right now. And I agree with David that it's very unlikely that he would ever veto this, because he's got active investigations going on. He's really got this massive cloud that is not going to dissipate anytime soon hanging over his administration and over his legislative agenda because of the questions about Russia, whether they are fair or not. That's beside the point. They're not going away. So Donald Trump is trying to deal with that right now. He's trying to move beyond that as much as he can. But in a way, he's kind of his own worst enemy by constantly going back and focusing on what has happened in the past and not kind of playing to his better angels to move forward, at least in a political context. That's just not happening as much as perhaps some people around him would like him to do.
But, you know, if we do go back, and David, I'll go to you on this, if we do go back, certainly during the course of the campaign, we did hear Trump speak a lot about how he'd like to repair relations between the U.S. and Russia. And we saw Trump and Putin in Russia pictured smiling and shaking hands at the recent G20. Sorry, not in Russia, but at the G20. So will this legislation cause relations between the Oval Office and the Kremlin to frost over again? Will it deplete the diplomatic leeway that he perhaps wanted to gain?
Well, remember, there's a lot of other things that Donald Trump can do to sweeten the pot for Putin, other than just removing economic sanctions. You know, the U.S. can pull completely out of Syria, for instance, or at least not stand in the way. The U.S. could be a little less supportive of the 3 Seas initiative in Eastern Europe, which is trying to diminish the market share of Russian oil and gas exports, which is frankly, if you resumed all of Russia's trading oil and gas in Eastern Europe, you would do a lot more for their economy than just easing sanctions would. So there's a lot of other things Trump can do. The question is whether or not he would be wise to do any of it. You remember what happened the last time we had a Russia reset at the very beginning of the Obama administration in 2009. They did that comical red button with the wrong Russian word on it. And they said, we're going to reset relationships with Putin. That didn't happen. And look where it got us. We had the Russians tampering with our election, maybe even to punish Hillary Clinton. The one thing that the Trump administration should be doing more of, and the only person I hear talking about it is Kellyanne Conway, is to differentiate between the idea that, yes, Russia tried to tamper with the election. They've tampered with every election probably in the last 30 years. And by the way, we do it too. The Obama people sent folks over in Israel to try to scotch Netanyahu's reelection. But the important thing is to say, yes, okay, fine, Russia tried their best to mess with the election, but there is no proof that has emerged that anybody in the Trump campaign actively colluded with the Russians or asked them to do this or helped them to do this. That's really the point. That's where the rubber meets the road with these investigations. I do think the president will be wise to say, okay, fine, I'm convinced, all of our intelligence people have convinced me that the Russians tried to undermine global confidence in our elections, to try to shake us. But I haven't seen any proof, and nobody's brought any forward, that the Trump people actively colluded with Russia, and that's the question that matters.
That is the question that matters, and it's under investigation now as well. Mm-hmm. So we'll take a quick break right now. We have a lot more coming up with our Washington Correspondents' Panel.